Hello, dear listeners. If you're new here, we're Margin Mavens, and we are obsessed with writing in our books and sharing our thoughts with you guys. In this episode, we are talking about The Mark of Athena by Rick Riordan, the third book in the Heroes of Olympus series. After some meddling ghosts, the crew is on the way to Rome, which promises safe travels and nothing going wrong at all. Right?
No. Not at all. Not even a little.
I really enjoyed The Mark of Athena.
Mm-hmm.
One, because I really love Annabeth.
Yes.
And so getting a lot more of her POV was really nice.
Mm-hmm.
Um, it's also the first time that we get to see Percy and Jason working together.
Which is
Which is interesting because at the beginning they're both very
wary of each other.
Weary of each other, and also both wanting to, like, they subconsciously take the role of leader because they're so used to that, like, hierarchy in both of their worlds, you know, like Jason being son of Jupiter, Percy being son of Poseidon. Like, they're both used to being that, like, highest ranking person,
demigod in
you
the
know.
room, yeah.
And so both of them, like, there's a scene pretty early on where they both go to take the, like, head of the table, and they're like, wait, why are you trying to take the head of the table?
Yeah.
Kind of, because even if we're looking at that hierarchy, right, Jason theoretically would be higher, right? But you really see the distinct favoritism, because despite the fact that Jason should be higher, right, every single time anything happens between the two of them, Percy is undoubtedly, like, put on top.
Right.
You know, like, and I find that really interesting. And they end up conceding and letting Annabeth take the head of the table, which makes more sense to me, you know? But alas. One of my gripes
hit me
was the continuous usage of the phrase schizophrenic to describe the gods.
Yeah.
Listen, for those who may not know, because it's not necessarily common knowledge, right? Your girl has a degree in psychology. So when people start using disorders as nicknames or as qualities, right?
It's ableist.
You better make sure you're using them correctly, right? And
don't use them at all.
But I'm saying, like, if somebody is schizophrenic, like, they're diagnosed with that, right? Like, you got to use the word because it's the only word that's available. But if we're talking gods who are constantly torn between Roman and Greek, right? They're not schizophrenic. They're just not.
It was really hard.
And so that was really annoying.
I wanted to scream.
That was really annoying. Okay, so let's back up a little bit. So the groups have been joined together, right? We've got the Greeks, and they finally show up on Roman soil. Percy and Reyna have a conversation very early on of, like, listen, this group is showing up. Do not fire on them, right? And then Octavius, I always forget his name because dealing with so many of the same names throughout everything we're reading. He decides he's going to go on board. And we don't realize until later on that Leo, right? He's the one that, he ends up firing onto Roman soldiers, which, listen, if you don't know anything about the Roman Empire, they don't take well to attacks.
No, they do not.
They take it very seriously. And so what should have been this peaceful conversation between the two turns into, like, an all-out battle.
Yep.
And once again, which is where I'm saying the favoritism really shows, because once again, despite the fact that this is his territory, right? Jason is, like, overpowered and hit with, like, a rock. And Percy ends up not, you know, like, but it could be like Percy was a lot
Rick,
more
I want to have words with you.
Percy was a lot more recently, you know, thinking
I
Roman.
I
don't know.
I'm tired of taking the short end of the spear over here, okay? Like,
and so they all decide that they are going off to Rome. They're going off to Rome because Annabeth has, so we find out that Annabeth and her mom are having issues, which is really rare because Annabeth is one of Athena's, like, favorite children. For good reason, right? Like, she's
smart, she's clever, she's intelligent.
the architect of Mount Olympus. Like,
she is a bad
girls got the resume. And Athena is losing her mind a little bit, trying to deal with both of her sides, right? Because Athena's, if we're talking short end of the spear, Athena really gets it.
Yeah.
When the Greeks get taken over by the Romans and the Romans decide that they are going to like besmirch everything that Athena stood for. So Athena turns into Minerva. And not only does she turn into Minerva, but they steal the Athena Parthenon and basically take away all of her might and all of her
traits, like
cool.
all of her traits, all of her talents, all of the things that the Greeks admire her for.
And it's not great. And so she obviously holds a big grudge. And so she has been sending her children throughout the eons on this quest to go and reclaim or follow the Mark of Athena. We find out that it's reclaiming the statue. And Annabeth kind of clocks it pretty early on that who she's going to have to fight in order to reclaim the statue is none other than Arachne. And for those who have been following along, the children of Athena have a very big phobia of spiders.
Same!
And so they're all kind of going onto this into Rome, knowing that Annabeth at some point is going to have to go off on her lonesome. Right? The rest of them are going to be doing their own thing. They're trying to find a giant to defeat. So everything's kind of going, swimmingly. They're not stressed in the slightest. What I really like was that we got to see a lot of stark differences between Percy and Jason, right? We got to see where both of them are willing to take that leadership, but one kind of falls into it a lot more naturally, right? Whereas I think, and Jason says it in the subsequent book, so I'm not going to get into it too much, but one of them is like a lot better at, I say being a leader because they're okay with changing course.
With making, changing course, making the big decisions like that.
Yeah.
It does not phase them because it's something that they've had to do basically for two so we're
both saying they, but an interesting thing is I'm thinking of one specific one. Who are you thinking of?
I'm thinking of Percy. Like it just makes like
solid. This is why we have this podcast. Okay, yeah. So
it's Percy. Like, look, I love 100%. Jason. I'm not a Jason hater at all. Like I adore him. I also am not. I adore him. I think he's great. But yeah, like it's obvious that it's Percy.
And I think it's interesting because I don't even think it's a favoritism thing. I think if we're really getting into it, it's 100% the like element that they are most aligned with, right? Even with Jason, when we go through in the next book, we can talk about it a little bit more, but we kind of see that wind, air, storm, all of that are a lot more volatile, whereas the water as a whole, as an element, right, is a lot more willing to bend and change based on whatever is going around it.
It's interesting that you say that because that's not what I was thinking of. I was thinking it's more like a Greek and Roman thing, whereas Romans are like more disciplined and they essentially got blinders on. Like they have a plan, they stick to the plan, they execute the plan, done. Whereas Greeks are more like they're more flexible. Like there's really they can make a plan, they can execute the plan, but then when the plan goes off the rails, they throw the plan away and they just improvise.
Well, I think your interesting point is made more interesting because Jason, by this point, isn't fully Roman anymore, right? Correct. So he should be a little bit better at leading because he's been dealing with the Greeks. He's been dealing with kind of like that planning on the fly thing. But inherently, who he is, and I'm not going to say he's Roman because we see that he's very much not as the course of the series continues.
Yes.
But he's still, that's why I end up leaning towards the idea of like the elements better because he's still a lot more kind of like, I don't know how to explain it. He's a lot more shaky, right?
Because like, he has not, because in Mark of Athena, he has not decided who and what he is. That's why.
And so in this one, it's a lot more of him trying to be Roman. And so when things go off course, he stresses out a lot.
He's struggling.
And I think Jason did not get a good introduction to this world in terms of his book, right? No. But I do think as we start seeing more and more of him grow, he's a lot more interesting. Am I still a 100% Percy lover? Yes. But Jason doesn't annoy me as much as he did in the first one. What I really liked is when we find out that Leo's great-grandfather was Sammy.
Yeah.
Really hurt my heart because so when Leo and Hazel meet, right? Hazel is like, you look exactly like my first boyfriend. And that's kind of weird to me. And it kind of creates this weird rift that
between
persists.
Leo and Frank.
Yeah, who is Hazel's boyfriend. Leo's this goofball, right? Like Leo falls for any girl that's nice to him. So his feelings toward Hazel are really complicated because he's like, she's with Frank. I don't want to ruin that, right? But there's some sort of pull. And Hazel also is like kind of leading him on, but not really. Like she's dealing with her own echoes of her memory when it comes to Sammy. And so their interactions are kind of odd. I liked the way that that was like playing out. One of my favorite scenes of this book is when Octavian shows up. He's on the boat, right? And he doesn't know Annabeth from Eve, right? Like it's so interesting to me because he constantly thinks less of the people he's dealing with, no matter who they are.
He underestimates 100%.
Yeah, and so when Annabeth seems as though she is cornered, right? He's like, throw your dagger to me. And she like drops it into the water. And he's like, oh, what a ditzy blonde. Like, this is so dumb of you. You know, now you've permanently lost your weapon. And he kind of does all this thing. And then Percy, lo and behold, is in the water, right? And so he shows up, blasts all the Romans off the boat, does some cool things. And
it's like, hey, you dropped this, babe. Here you go.
And
it's
such a cute scene because they don't have any like telepathy. There's no like magical reason as to why they should know each other, right? In terms of, I guess, like other stories like this, they always tend to have some sort of like bond that makes them, you know, be able to like kind of feel each other. But it's just from them being together for so long, not just in a romantic way, but being, you know, friends and teammates and all of these things.
Quests and doing all these things. Yeah.
Percy 100% goes like, there's no way Annabeth just threw her dagger. That's the thing from her mom in the ocean.
Yeah.
And so it was a really fun scene for me. What I also really loved in this book is we got to see, not for the first time, because Percy is a very like self-defeatist person in terms of his own feelings, but we really got to see him lay into like, what if I am not worth all of this faith that everybody is putting in me? You know, like everybody throughout his entire Percy throughout this entire series since, you know, the Lightning Thief, a lot of people have had their faith in him. One, because they knew him and saw him in action, but two, a lot of it became because he is son of Poseidon. Yeah. You know, they were like, he has this immense strength. He needs to be the one that like steps up. He can do this. Right. And he really has those moments of crap. Like, I'm still just like a 16-year-old boy. Like, what if I am not built for this? What if I let them down and stuff like that? And that was really interesting to see that kind of play out. Right. Listen, we talk about Rick not liking Jason. Right. What on earth could Nico have done to piss Rick off so badly?
See, you went Nico. I immediately thought Leo. I was like, what did Leo do?
No, listen, Leo doesn't, I don't want to say he doesn't suffer, but like objectively, he does not go through the same level of crap that Nico has gone through since being introduced. Like, Nico feels like the Rick's punching bag because he gets introduced literally just to lose his sister.
Yep.
Right? Then to feel like he was betrayed by, the first people that he really trusted besides his sister.
Yep.
Finds out that he's a son of Hades, and so he's going to always be ostracized. So he immediately goes and is by himself, which only adds to him being ostracized because no one wants to hang out.
And he's 14 now.
Yeah, like he is like, nobody wants me around, nobody loves me. But then he adds to it because he's never around. So when he is around, everyone's like, oh gosh, this creepy kid is just showing up, right?
Yeah.
Like, I feel for him, but he also doesn't make it easier, right? And it was a difficult. Okay. Can you add that as a note? Thanks. And he just doesn't help himself, right? And so with this one, he ends up being taken and he gets put in a jar. He is surviving off of pomegranate seeds and he is putting himself in like a death-like trance. Like, Nico's a really interesting character. I don't know what he did to piss off Rick and to continuously piss off Rick because his journey does not get any easier. He doesn't get much respite. Like, he is repeatedly put through it.
The problem is he's so scarily powerful on a level that is different from Jason and Percy. Because he's also one of the big three, and I think a lot of people forget that.
I know. It scares me.
Like, he is high-key terrifying.
Yeah, like he can raise an army of the dead,
Yeah.
And he doesn't need like a blessing of Mars to do it. Like he's scary.
And I think part of that is because Rick wants people to understand that he's scary.
Yeah. And so then he just really gets the short end of the stick, right? So we finally get him rescued. There are a couple things that kind of stick out, right? We get an introduction to what being in Tartarus is like. Because Nico, the whole reason he was end up being captured is because he went in search of the doors of death. And this meant that he was in Tartarus, right? And we get a lot of firsthand account of what Tartarus is like in the next book, but we won't open that yet. But this is why I'm saying I don't understand what Rick could have possibly been mad at Nico for, right? Because to get meta for a second, anything Nico could have done to piss off Rick, Rick did himself. Like, Rick is angry at himself, and he's taking it out on a fictional 14-year-old.
I mean, maybe that's what's happening. Maybe this is Rick's form of therapy. I don't know. But for some context for everybody, one thing that they've discovered about the Doors of Death is that there's the Tartarus side, and then there's also, the side on Earth, right? Yes. Like in the regular world that they have to find. And that becomes
really big.
Really big in the next book.
It's fine. So Annabeth, going on her little quest, she manages to find the statue, also manages to find Arachne. For those who are not aware of the legend of Arachne, her whole thing was she was a great weaver, and she proclaimed very loudly that she was better than Athena. Which, for those who might still believe in the gods existing or have any sort of semblance of that, right? You never say you are better than one of the gods at anything.
Yeah.
There's a reason that people don't say that they are more beautiful than Aphrodite. There is a reason that people say they are not, stronger than Ares, right? Like, there's just common knowledge. So back then, she says, I'm better than Athena. She and Athena have a contest. Athena wins. Now, there's a lot of speculation about whether Athena was legitimately better or whether it was like a god's pride thing, right? We never really know that answer because Athena's never going to say, it wasn't her. And that's not something you're going to ask a god because, once again, you're not going to do it. So she finds Arachne. Arachne is going to kill her. She says, hey, I've got some quote-unquote connections at Mount Olympus. Your tapestries would be beautiful there. And Arachne, not able to stop herself. Like, her fatal flaw is that
Pride.
need for recognition and pride and all of that. And so she goes, I would love my tapestries to be in Mount Olympus. What do I need to do? And Annabeth, being who she is like, hey, create this thing. And she gives her the dimensions and stuff like that. Arachne creates it. And in needing to create it, she has to undo a lot of the thread that she has around her layer, including the thread around the statue and yada yada. And basically creates Chinese handcuffs. Annabeth manages to trick her into going into it and getting trapped and does all the things. So Annabeth, in the long run, beats Arachne in this moment. I was going to say she wins, but she beats Arachne in this moment.
Mm-hmm.
Her friends and Percy show up, and she's like, everything is swell.
Mm-hmm.
Everything is great. Leo and Jason and all of them work to get the statue on the ship.
Yep.
And as they're working to get the statue on the ship, Annabeth basically almost falls into Tartarus.
Mm-hmm.
And Percy, being who he is, goes to help his lovely girlfriend. And now they're both dangling into Tartarus. For those who are not aware of what Tartarus is, it is the stomping grounds of monsters before they make it back to the mortal realm. Percy has the realization that he cannot hold both of them up. Annabeth has the realization that he cannot hold both of them up. And she says, Percy, let me go. And he goes, no. Yells at Nico, hey, meet us at the doors. And tells Annabeth, like, we're together. And they plummet into Tartarus.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Okay. My only note, right? Two things. One, I love that Jason's priority when everything starts collapsing is to get Piper out of it. That was cute. Points for Jason. Second note, Percy refusing to let Annabeth go alone is crazy. He is the blueprint. No man existed for me when Percy did this, when I read it for the first time. And that's how the book ends.
Yeah.
Mark of Athena ends with them plummeting into Tartarus.
Yeah. Fun fact,
Listeners.
I was a grown-ass adult reading this book, wanting to fight Rick Riordan. Like, look, it's not Percy's the blueprint for me. Like, love Percy, respect Percy, but I'm too old. Like, it's just not. So, like, I finished that book and I'm like, Rick, when I catch you, I catch you, Rick, it's on site. And then,
and I think it really is an age thing because I was like Percy's age when I started reading these books.
Yeah, I was older.
Yeah.
So, like, and also, quick brief spoiler, his dedication in the subsequent book about, like, sorry about the cliffhanger, ha ha ha.
Yeah,
on site. It's on site with this man. It is on site.
I mean, listeners, listen, this is our throwback series, right? So when I originally read this story, House of Hades wasn't even like, we didn't even have a name for it yet. You know, it was Mark of Athena got published, read that thing immediately, right? I remember, I think I mentioned it in last video, but I remember my dad taking me to Barnes & Noble for my birthday, and I picked up Mark of Athena, and it was so new that, like, they didn't have hardcovers yet. Picked up the paperback, ran through that paperback, right? Immediately went, oh my gosh, we don't have a confirmed, book yet. Because in that point, it wasn't like you could just easily check on Twitter. And it was a cultural reset for me because Rick was the first author, I think, that really lost some of my trust. Because I think especially with authors of YA specifically, or I think his is middle grade technically, there's a level of trust there that, like, your characters are going to be okay because they're quote unquote for children. Right? And so reading this as like a high schooler and having them theoretically not be okay was crazy because you genuinely, if this would have happened in Percy Jackson and the Olympians, right? I would not have felt the same amount of fear because his name is in the series title. right? For
So
it to
now
happen in the
it's
Heroes of
Heroes of
Olympus,
Olympus. Yeah.
I was like, oh my gosh, there's a whole other set of crew members, you know? So it was a lot. It really shook me. I walked into this thinking that this was going to be my favorite book. And I think when I finished Mark of Athena, it was. And then I got into House of Hades.
It's still my favorite.
Oh, House of Hades is my favorite. So
House of Hades and I have beef.
Listeners, be prepared that the next episode where we talk about House of Hades is going to be such a fun one.
Because we're literally recording it as soon as we're done with this one. Yeah. Like 5 minutes before we start recording it, we're going to sound the same.
Yeah.
We're going to be more emotionally compromised.
Thank you, listeners, for being here. We appreciate each and every single one of you, and we will see you in the next video.